On a remote peninsula rising from the Aegean Sea, there is a place where the day does not begin in the morning, and where modern time quietly stops. Mount Athos has followed the same rhythm for more than 1,000 years, shaped not by clocks or calendars, but by prayer. Here, monks wake in the deep of night to chant in candlelit churches. They work in silence, eat sparingly, and measure the year by feasts and fasts rather than dates. Stone monasteries cling to cliffs like fortresses, built to endure isolation, invasion, and centuries of storms. Access is limited. Rules are strict. The outside world remains deliberately distant. Mount Athos is not a ruin and not a retreat. It is a functioning world with its own laws, its own sense of time, and a way of life that has barely changed since the Byzantine Empire. In this video, we will step inside that world, tracing how it was formed, how it governs itself, how monks live day to day, why its architecture looks the way it does, and how this hidden peninsula continues to exist almost untouched in the modern age. Mount Athos is not isolated by accident. Its geography is the first and most enduring rule of life here. The peninsula stretches like a narrow finger into the Aegean Sea, cut off from the mainland by dense forests, steep hills, and a single guarded land entrance. There are no airports, no highways, no casual shortcuts. Arrival is slow, usually by boat, allowing the outside world to fall away mile by mile. This physical separation has shaped Athos from the beginning, filtering who enters and how life unfolds once inside. The terrain is demanding. Mountains rise sharply from the coast, footpaths replace roads, and monasteries are built wherever the land permits, on cliffs, above ravines, or deep within forests. Daily movement requires effort. Nothing here is convenient, and that is precisely the point. The landscape itself enforces discipline, silence, and attentiveness. For the monks, this land is not neutral ground. Athos is traditionally understood as a territory dedicated entirely to the Virgin Mary, a place removed from ordinary social order and reserved for a single purpose. Fields, forests, and coastlines are treated as part of a sacred environment, not resources to be exploited. Agriculture is modest, construction is restrained, and expansion is limited by both terrain and rule. Geography here is not background scenery. It is an active participant. The mountains limit noise. The forests conceal paths. The sea controls access. Long before written rules governed Athos, the land itself was already teaching solitude, endurance, and restraint. Long before towering monasteries rose from its cliffs, Mount Athos was a place of withdrawal. By the early centuries of Christianity, solitary ascetics were already settling in its caves and forests, seeking distance from cities, authority, and distraction. They lived without walls, without institutions, and often without names, men drawn by the belief that separation from the world sharpened attention to God. This scattered way of life began to change in the 10th century with the arrival of Athanasius the Athonite. Backed by imperial support from Constantinople, he founded the Great Lavra in 963, introducing a structured form of communal monastic life. Monks would no longer live entirely alone, but under shared rules of prayer, work, and obedience. What emerged was not just a monastery, but a model. The success of the Great Lavra transformed Athos. Other communities followed, each adopting similar patterns while retaining distinct spiritual customs. Written rules, known as typica, formalized daily schedules, property limits, worship practices, and authority structures. Over time, Athos developed into a federation of monasteries rather than a single institution, united by faith but resistant to central control. Empires rose and fell around it. Byzantium collapsed. Ottoman rule arrived. Modern Greece was born. Yet Athos remained. Its survival was not based on power or wealth, but on continuity, preserving a way of life that changed slowly, cautiously, and only when necessary. What began as scattered hermits became a self-contained monastic world, shaped as much by discipline as by devotion. Mount Athos does not function like a monastery within a country. It functions like a world with boundaries. At the administrative center of the peninsula lies Carias, a small settlement that serves as the capital of Athos. Here, representatives from each of the 20 ruling monasteries form the holy community, the governing body responsible for internal order, discipline, and coordination. Decisions are made collectively. No single monastery rules the others. Authority is shared, cautious, and slow by design. While Athos is geographically part of Greece, its internal life operates under a unique legal framework. Civil authority is minimal and carefully limited. A civil governor represents the Greek state, but his role is administrative rather than religious. Matters of prayer, discipline, daily life, and spiritual order remain entirely in monastic hands. This balance allows Athos to remain politically stable without surrendering its internal rhythm. Equally important is Athos' spiritual jurisdiction. The peninsula answers directly to the ecumenical patriarchate, not to local bishops. This separation shields Athos from regional pressures and reinforces its identity as a place set apart from ordinary ecclesiastical politics. Rules here are not designed for flexibility. They are designed for endurance. Entry is regulated. Residence is restricted. Change requires consensus and patience. What emerges is a rare structure, a community that governs itself not to expand or adapt quickly, but to remain faithful to a way of life defined centuries ago, and still lived day after day in near silence. On Mount Athos, the day does not begin with sunrise. It begins while the world is still asleep. Sometime between 2 and 4 in the morning, depending on the monastery and the season, the sound of the semantron, a wooden board struck with a mallet, cuts through the silence. There are no alarms, no spoken announcements. The sound alone is enough. Monks rise from their cells, dress in darkness, and walk toward the church guided by memory rather than light. The first hours of the day belong entirely to prayer. The midnight office flows into Orthros, and then into the divine liturgy. On ordinary days, these services can last several hours. On feast days, they stretch much longer. Chanting is unhurried and unadorned, carried by human voices alone. Candles flicker against stone walls. Time slows until it almost disappears. After the morning services, the monastery shifts quietly into work. There is no rush. Assignments are given as acts of obedience rather than preference. Some monks tend gardens and olive groves. Others paint icons, bind books, bake bread, repair roofs, or prepare food for the community. Conversation is minimal. Silence is not enforced harshly. It is assumed. Work continues through the late morning and early afternoon, often followed by a simple meal eaten together while a text from the church fathers is read aloud. There is little rest, but enough. As evening approaches, monks return again to prayer for vespers and compline. After sunset, the monastery grows still. Lights fade. Doors close. Silence settles back over the stone corridors. This rhythm repeats every day, nearly unchanged across centuries. No weekends, no holidays from prayer. On Mount Athos, life is not divided into sacred moments and ordinary ones. The entire day is shaped as a single, uninterrupted act of devotion. If the day on Mount Athos is shaped by prayer, the year is shaped by expectation. Time here does not move forward in a straight line. It circles. Weeks and months return again and again to the same moments of fasting, vigilance, and celebration. The calendar is not decorative. It governs how much monks eat, how long they sleep, how intensely they pray, and how heavy their labor becomes. At the center of the year stands Pascha, the Orthodox celebration of Easter. Preparation begins weeks in advance with Great Lent, a period marked by extended services, reduced meals, and increased silence. When Pascha finally arrives, it does so in darkness. Monks gather late at night, holding candles, chanting through hours that carry them toward dawn. There is no spectacle, no audience, only voices rising slowly as light returns to the world. Almost as significant is the Dormition of the Theotokos in mid-August. Mount Athos is traditionally dedicated to the Virgin Mary, and this feast holds a unique weight across the peninsula. Many monasteries observe it with all-night vigils that can last 8 to 10 hours, drawing monks from distant communities to pray together. Each monastery also keeps the feast day of its founding saint. On these occasions, bells ring, guests arrive from other houses, and the normal rhythm stretches without breaking. Even weekly time bends here. Saturday nights bring longer vigils. Fasting seasons reshape the kitchen, the fields, and the body itself. On Athos, the year is not something to be managed. It is something to be endured, entered, and repeated again and again, until time itself feels secondary to what it contains. The buildings of Mount Athos do not try to impress. They try to endure. Every monastery is organized around its Catholicon, the main church, placed at the center of the compound like a fixed point around which all life turns. These churches follow Byzantine designs that favor weight and enclosure. Thick stone walls, narrow windows, low light. Frescoes cover nearly every surface, not as decoration but as presence. Saints, martyrs, and scenes of judgment watching silently as prayers rise. Sound lingers here. Chant does not echo, it settles. Beyond the churches, many monasteries resemble fortresses. High walls, iron gates, and defensive towers speak of centuries when pirates, raiders, and political instability made isolation dangerous as well as sacred. Monasteries such as Simonopetra, built dramatically on a sheer cliff, appear almost impossible, structures suspended between rock and sky. Their location was not chosen for beauty alone, but for protection, visibility, and withdrawal. Farther from the main monasteries lie sketes and cells, smaller communities and solitary dwellings scattered across forests and hillsides. Here, architecture grows simpler. Stone gives way to wood, buildings shrink. Some hermitages are little more than caves reinforced by hand. The deeper the solitude, the fewer the walls. On Mount Athos, architecture follows a clear logic. The closer one lives to the center, the more structured the space. The farther one withdraws, the more the building disappears into the landscape. Stone, wood, and earth are arranged not to dominate the land, but to vanish quietly within it, leaving prayer as the only lasting structure. Mount Athos does not reveal itself all at once. Entry is deliberate, controlled, and slow. Access to the peninsula is limited by design. Visitors must receive prior permission, arrive by boat, and pass through a single land gateway. Numbers are restricted. Time is short. Movement is regulated. These measures are not recent security responses. They reflect a long-standing conviction that separation protects silence and silence protects prayer. The rule most often associated with Athos is the Avaton, the centuries-old restriction that prohibits women from entering the peninsula. The rule is strictly enforced and deeply woven into Athonite identity. It is not presented as a social statement, nor debated internally as a policy choice. For the monks, it is part of a broader logic of renunciation, a boundary meant to preserve a way of life built on celibacy, withdrawal, and undivided attention. Pilgrims who do enter quickly discover that Athos does not adapt to them. There are no guided tours, no explanatory signs, no schedules adjusted for convenience. Guests eat when the monastery eats, pray when the bells sound, and walk the same steep paths as the monks. Comfort is minimal. Silence is expected. Observation replaces participation. This distance, geographical, social, and psychological, is not accidental. Mount Athos survives by remaining difficult to reach, difficult to enter, and difficult to stay within. What it offers is not access, but encounter. A brief crossing into a world that exists by choosing, again and again, not to open itself fully to the modern gaze. In the 21st century, Mount Athos is no longer populated only by Greek monks. Brothers now come from across Eastern Europe, Russia, the Balkans, and beyond. Different languages are spoken in the refectory. Different accents shape the chant. Yet the rule remains the same for all. National identity dissolves quickly inside a life structured by obedience, silence, and shared prayer. Modern technology has reached Athos, but cautiously. Electricity exists, often limited and discreet. Some monasteries use generators or solar power, not for comfort, but for necessity, lighting, preservation work, basic communication. Telephones and internet access are tightly controlled. Technology is treated as a tool, not a presence. It is allowed to support monastic life, never to shape it. Preservation has become one of the peninsula's quiet struggles. Centuries-old buildings require constant repair. Frescoes fade, roofs collapse. Restoration teams work alongside monks, guided by strict principles. Repair without modernization, preservation without alteration. Nothing is rebuilt to look new. Age is not erased, it is stabilized. At the same time, Mount Athos has drawn increasing global attention. Journalists request access. Documentaries are proposed. Political leaders and heads of state occasionally visit, briefly pulling Athos into the international spotlight. Each visit is tightly managed, carefully contained. Curiosity is tolerated, never encouraged. This creates a constant tension. Athos is visible, but resists being seen. Known, but unwilling to explain itself. The modern world presses closer, while the peninsula quietly maintains distance. It neither rejects the present nor yields to it. It continues, unchanged in purpose, selective in contact, deliberate in silence. Mount Athos stands as evidence that another way of living has not disappeared. Here, time does not rush forward. It slows, repeats, and returns. Hours exist to serve prayer, not efficiency. Days are shaped by worship before they are shaped by work. The year unfolds through feasts and fasts that train patience rather than excitement. Work on Athos is never merely functional. Fields are tended, icons painted, walls repaired, not to produce more, but to remain faithful. Labor is absorbed into prayer, stripped of ambition, and given meaning through obedience and repetition. Even stone participates in this vision. Architecture does not compete for attention. Churches are built for chant, not spectacle. Walls defend silence as much as they defend bodies. As life grows simpler, buildings shrink, until prayer needs almost no shelter at all. Mount Athos is often misunderstood as an escape from history. In truth, it has endured history, empires, invasions, revolutions, and technologies, without surrendering its inner order. It does not stand outside time, but within it, refusing to be reorganized by every passing age. What Athos offers the modern world is not an argument and not a solution. It offers a presence, a reminder that silence can be structured, discipline can be chosen, and meaning can be sustained without expansion, speed, or visibility. Hidden on a narrow peninsula, this world continues, quietly insisting that not everything valuable must change in order to survive.